Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk today about overcoming resistance to anything. And I really mean anything. And it's going to be more simple than you realize. Actually, so simple that, it's like something that's simple. It's simple to do it, but it's simple not to do it. Something that's easy to do, it's easy not to do. So don't let the simplicity of it fool you, right? Sometimes the most profound things are actually quite simple, right? So I'm going to give you a little basic formula in terms of how to overcome resistance. And what I would suggest that you do is you test it out. And when I say test it out, I don't mean let's see if it works. I mean, put it to the test, right? Actually test it. Like, be skeptical, but then do it fully as I'm suggesting. And then really see for yourself, does this actually support me or not? Okay. And before we do that, I'm going to actually, let me give an explanation first, and then I'm going to read something. Okay. And then we'll talk more. So, what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? When Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, give as you want to receive, did he mean have a feeling about somebody else? Like, in other words, just feel good about them. I mean, if you take love your neighbor as yourself, it's very easy to interpret that as, just have a good feeling about other people. It's very easy to, in our minds, say, oh, I like that person, or I love that person. I love everyone. It's very easy to say that and actually still not really fully love them. Because if you fear somebody, how can you also love them simultaneously? If you resist somebody, and when I say resist, I mean it's like you're not really able to really just fully express yourself with them, then how can you really say that you love them? And I know that a lot of us have a resistance to really sharing ourselves openly with other people. Really talk about the things that are really going on within us, within our minds, within our thoughts, how we actually feel about things. And it can be challenging sometimes to be honest with ourselves about that, especially when we don't think there's a way to stop that. Like, it's just who we are. I don't like these kind of people. I don't like this person. I have resistances to being around certain people or whatever. And it's like, what can I possibly do about that? So if you don't know what you can do, if you don't realize that you can change it and know how to change that, then what will end up happening is we'll end up suppressing ourselves. We'll end up suppressing those thoughts. And then we'll try to convince ourselves that we love everybody. But the reality is, if you were to actually go in the presence of people in this world, you'll experience there will be some people you do have a resistance to that you don't actually love. And I mean, you can go somewhere and you'll feel uncomfortable, for example. That's just one example of how it would play out. But there's the other side of things too, which is loving your neighbor as giving as you want to receive. And let me put it this way. Do you want to just get a good feeling? You could say, yeah, that's all I'm looking for. But you really aren't able to focus on that unless you have certain things met, certain basic needs met. If you don't have food and water and shelter and clothing and things like that, those are primary. So you don't really care actually about how someone else is going to make you feel if you don't have these things met. And you can look up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like a simple a diagram of what the most basic needs are, all the way up to self-actualization, which is like self-fulfillment, right? In other words, how we feel is only something that becomes prominent in our minds. And when I say how we feel, it's like someone says something and you're like, oh, I don't like what that person said to me. That's only possible if you're not starving. If you're starving, you're not going to give a shit what anyone, like in other words, if you were starving and someone came to you and they were like, here's some food, you dumbass, eat it. You wouldn't be like, what? Huh? How dare you make me feel that way? I'm not eating this food. Like, you would eat the food because you're starving. You know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't care in that moment about how they're making you feel. So we don't realize how, as human beings on this planet who have certain basic needs, even though we still have struggles and stresses and things like that, we do have certain basic needs met and consistently, so that we have even the luxury and time to entertain ourselves with all kinds of other stuff of like, how do I feel about certain things? How are certain people making me feel? And how do I feel about other people and so forth, right? So the reason I'm addressing that point is because unless we address the fact that most people are in constant fear of survival, and that really actually goes for everybody, even the elite. Unless we address that, and actually it applies mostly to the elite, because that is why the elite attempt to control reality so much. Right? We're all doing this at some level, but it's just that the elite are in a position to actually influence other people's lives, like very directly through systems. So like if Facebook doesn't like what you have to say, they could just delete your account and ban you for life from their platform, for example. And the only reason they would do that is because they're afraid of certain people saying certain things. Whether those things are valid or not is not the point. So everybody at some level is participating in a fear of others, of what they might say, what they might do, and then trying to control reality in some form at whatever level or position you're at in society in order to prevent people from saying certain things, or really to prevent you from feeling a certain way based on how someone else makes you feel. And I did a video, I think yesterday or the day before, I'm not sure, maybe the day before, about when people say like you're being aggressive, but it's just you're just talking and you're not actually physically doing anything, but they say you're being aggressive. And I did a really great video on that, which you might want to check out. And it went into all those points. So there's like this fear within all of us, especially those of us who see that there are massive problems in this world and that things are not right in this world and things in your own life are not right. And, you know, you can go on the internet and all kinds of books and people, and they're going to be like, you just have to, you know, change your thinking and then that's going to make your life better. But it's not really that simple, because it depends on where you're at in this world. Like if you're starving to death and you live in a third world country where there's a dictator and there's literally, you're not in the in group, so you don't get any opportunities to build a, you're not in that system, then there's very little you can do, regardless of how you change your thinking. And yes, you can find examples of people who were able to break out of that, but by and large, it doesn't happen. The reality is we live in a system that's interconnected, and it's connected through money. So if you live in a first world country, there's exchange rates that makes your currency more valuable than the currency of someone else in a third world country, let's say, right? So even if they work 10 times as hard, they still can't make as much money as you. So it's not just about your thinking, it's about the systems that our thinking has allowed to be created over time, right? So yes, our thinking is what's influencing these things. However, it is not like you can just think differently right now and everything changes, because our thoughts become embedded in reality. Like our thoughts motivate what we do, and then that creates systems, and then those systems start to control how reality works, like how resources are distributed, how the access people have to things. So it's not like your thoughts just instantly manifest a result, right? This is a physical space-time reality where your thoughts take time, because the truth is it's your actions that are molding reality. Your thoughts are just directing what your actions are. So depending on the starting point of your thoughts, it's going to determine what you do. And if you look around at this world and you see the massive inequality, you can see what the starting point of our thoughts has been for billions of years, right? From the beginning of time. So in terms of looking at, for example, the Jesus message. Oh, someone's trying to call me on here. In terms of looking at the Jesus message, Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, give as you want to receive. So that is not possible in a world where there are systems which create inequality, because not everyone has access to everything. And so some people have to work their whole lives for very little pay to create the things that everybody else has very immediate access to. And those are the ones who are in that position are the ones who are like focused on how they feel and all that stuff. Does that make sense? So how do we love our neighbor as ourselves if these systems exist? Well, what that means is those of us who are in a position to have time to watch a video like this or make a video like this, we have to now take responsibility for changing those systems. Because unless we do, then we can't love our neighbor as ourselves, because our neighbor, we will always be in fear of our neighbor and vice versa, because we will have something that they don't have, which they want, or vice versa. And that inequality will only grow, and the elite will only try to control more because they're afraid everyone's going to try to take what they have. So it's a problem. And unless we start speaking up and doing something about it, so it's not just speaking up, but the reality is if it's just one person trying to do it, or 10 people trying to change something, that's not going to happen, because the way reality works is based on collective agreement. It's based on collective consent. That's why voting exists. Now, I'm not saying that we can all go and vote and then suddenly things would change, because the way we vote right now, by and large, is we vote for leaders who then enact policies, and they don't have to enact policies that are best. They can enact whatever fucking policies they want, and we have no say. So we elect leaders who are charismatic and make certain promises and appeal to certain emotions, because we allow ourselves to be manipulated by feelings, because that's our starting point, is we want to feel good. See, it's all going back to the same point I started with, which is our starting point is we're just trying to feel good from other people. Politicians know that. Corporations know that. They don't make advertisements to support you to understand why their product is best. They make advertisements to appeal to the basically the sexual imagery that exists within you, the desire for sex and the desire for money. And they appeal to those two things through imagery and through sounds and words, and then use that to manipulate the consumer to associate those feelings with the product. And then now you automatically just want that product. So it's just mind control, right? That's what marketing is. Governments do it, corporations do it. Politicians know how to say the right things to get you to vote for them, so they can be in the position where now apparently they have permission, and then they just do whatever they want behind the scenes, and they don't share most of that with you. And then the media doesn't really talk about what's really happening. They just present whatever conflict or picture or whatever they need to keep you distracted from understanding what's really happening. And so if you just sit, and if there's only 1 or 2 people or 10 people or 100 people talking about the problems in this world, and even talking about solutions, it won't change. Well, let me back up. If no one talks about it, it won't change, because people won't look at, we can do things differently. If only one person tries to go and change those things, or only 10 people or 100 people try to go change those things, and yet the corporations, the governments, everybody is still manipulating the masses of humanity, it can't change. So, I mean, 100 people can't go and change everything, because they need the consent of everybody, or at least 51%. And so what is the purpose of what I'm doing? Is to talk to you and say, look, we need to stand up together, and we need to talk to other people and get them to stand up, and at least get enough people to say, I would agree to a system that is best for everybody. I would agree to that. And we don't want to do it from the perspective of manipulating everybody through fancy flashing images. We want to do it through and pictures and all that shit. We want to do it through each person seeing for themselves the common sense within what is being suggested, and why we're saying it's best, right? And you can imagine all the fear that would be behind not being able to accept that. Like, oh, equality, that's communism. Well, I'm not talking about communism. If I was, I would say communism, right? If I was talking about socialism, I would talk about socialism. I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about what's best for all. None of those things are best for all. There's elements that are cool. There's elements that are not cool. The major problem with communism and socialism, etc., is that it's based on dictation. It's not based on self-responsibility. So it's not based on actual consent. It's based on forcing everybody to a point of equality that's not equal to what the full potential of the human being is, right? So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about equality equal to your individual absolute personal potential best. So a system that would be best for all would have to support that. And you might say, well, that's not possible, or that's never existed. Well, no shit, it's never existed, because that's never been our starting point as human beings to create something like that. It's always been from the perspective of trying to control everybody, from the starting point of accepting human nature as it is, as evil, as corrupt, as not caring about their neighbor equally. But human nature can change. It can change if each person takes responsibility for changing it. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, each person is actually accepting themselves and allowing themselves to participate in patterns that are not best, to participate in the desire for just experience and energy and feeling good, and rejecting feeling bad, and not considering the consequences of what they participate in and how that affects everybody else. And the reality is, if you watch David Pepin's video that he made the other day, which I shared, he made a really great point, which is you vote through the way you spend money. You're not actually voting for policies. When you go to the polls and you are, at election times stuff, you vote for politicians and shit. They go and make a bunch of laws, but all those laws are to protect companies and so forth to be able to produce products which we then buy, and then relationships between how all that works and how money works. And so by us participating in that system, we're giving consent to it. So it's actually in how we're spending money that is giving the real consent. So all of that has to change. And it may seem like a really big, crazy thing to be able to sort out. That's why we have to start with ourselves individually first, okay? So why am I making this specific video? Firstly, I'm just giving context, because if I just jump in and start talking about it, it's very easy for someone to say, well, I just want to overcome resistance to something that's actually not best for them, okay? The reality is what we have to primarily overcome the resistance towards is our neighbor. There's so much fear and resistance that we have between each other that we would even entertain ideas and thoughts that, oh, well, if someone's in a bad position in life, it's just their fucking fault and they need to figure it out. And, I'm not here to help other people or take responsibility for them. That's not fair, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's how much fear and resistance we have. But you wouldn't treat your children that way. And the reality is your child is just another human being. Your family member is just another human being. They're not actually special. You're just placing value on that, right? So that doesn't mean you don't consider them because you're responsible within that specific family unit. But again, the reason why we can't, we would feel like, well, I can't care about another person's child like I care about mine, is because we know there's a system that says if I don't compete and take for my child and I focus on someone else, then my child's not going to have. So I'm not saying the solution is to go and just work and pay for other people's kids. It's simply just for us to create a new system and to give consent to that system so that everybody can have what they need. And so we don't have to fear each other. This is the whole point, right? Okay, so let's look at resistance, okay? Because the reality is we're not going to be able to overcome all resistance to every single thing and to every person immediately like that. It's a process, because there's layers of beliefs and energy and feelings and patterns. They're like layered in our body physically, okay? So we have to walk back through those layers like peeling an onion and confronting them within ourselves, facing them, releasing them, and then changing how we interact with others based on that. And then getting to the point where we then keep investigating within ourselves and we keep peeling more layers and more layers until there's nothing left. And then at that point, when there's no more fear within us towards changing the world, towards other people, doesn't mean you're gonna leave your door unlocked. Doesn't mean you're just gonna leave your kids next to a total stranger. That's not what I mean by removing fear. What I mean is removing the fear and the resistance towards others that would prevent you from saying, okay, it's okay for there to be a system where everybody has what they need. Like, that's a basic fundamental fear and resistance that we have, that another person is actually equal to me, right? That's a major point we have to confront. So we have to first now go through and look at what are the things that we fear within our interactions with other people, our beliefs of other people. And all of it essentially starts in childhood, right? So what is the solution to overcoming resistance? So specifically, I'm going to use the example of overcoming resistance to speaking up and sharing what I see are problems in this world and challenging other people. If they're participating in bullshit, if they're participating in some excuse or justification as to why the world can't change or why they can't change or why other people can't change, that's something I want to challenge. That's something I want to challenge in myself. And when I see it in my world, I want to challenge it in another person. Now, if I just go into an energetic reaction and I start blaming other people and stuff, that's not a solution. So I have to first take the point back to myself and see if I react to another person, that's something I need to first look at and see why am I reacting, and now remove that pattern of what that person is saying or doing that symbolically represents something within myself that I have separated myself from and see myself as either inferior or superior to, in which case I need to take that apart within myself, because there's a construct there that's causing me to act in automated ways. Anytime you're reacting, that means you're doing something again that you've done before, which means you are a fucking robot, okay? Life is not a robot. Life is organic. Life is expressive. Life is always changing. It's always expanding beyond even its limitations. Robots just do the same thing over and over, repeatedly, predictably. That's why politicians and corporations are able to control people. If people weren't robots, then marketing and advertising wouldn't work and companies wouldn't spend billions of fucking dollars doing it, okay? So what's the simple point? The simple point is to first look at what it is you're participating in, okay? It's much easier to do this when you write it down and you just be honest with yourself. You just let it all out. Don't hold back. Don't try to suppress it. Imagine you're looking at somebody else doing something and you're just writing out what they're doing. You wouldn't judge what they're doing. You would just be like, here's what they're doing. Here's what doesn't make sense. Oh, okay. Then the next step would be to look at all of that and apply self-forgiveness within it. Self-forgiveness is essentially the statement of, I forgive myself that I have accepted it and allowed myself to blank, 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 depending on whatever the specific thing is. Another thing you can look at is, I have accepted and allowed myself, I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to not, for example, to not realize such and such. Like something that you have not considered in the past that you're now understanding. You can forgive yourself for not realizing it and then integrate that as part of your new understanding and realization as to who you are and what you now operate from. Okay, so that's in essence how I do it. And I didn't make that up. I've learned it from other people that I saw were quite effective. And then I basically copied that pattern and learned it and figured out for myself how it really works, and to find that point where I actually physically change based on doing it. So you can't just take what somebody else does and just blindly like copy it. Because, and that's why I said in the very beginning of this video, test out what I'm saying, test it. Meaning try it for yourself and then take it to the limit. Like really put yourself into it and see, can I support myself to actually change using this method, this process that's being suggested, okay? And I'm also going to suggest that, oh, well, let me finish that previous point. You forgive yourself for the pattern, and then you commit yourself to how you are going to act or consider or behave within the context of moving forward. How should things be? Okay, so it's like you're looking at how you've been acting in an automated way, and now you're looking at, okay, that's how I was instructed, whether it was from my family, my environment, whatever. Just like a computer, it's been programmed with instructions. Now I'm going to re-instruct myself. I'm going to give myself a new set of instructions. But this time it's coming from me, based in the awareness and based in common sense and based in what actually is best. And I'm going to give myself those instructions. And if I experience any resistance within giving myself those new instructions, that means there's more points I need to uncover and look at and forgive, okay? So the resistance then becomes like a guide in a way. It's like, if I'm resisting something, hey, that means I need to go down that path and look at it. Okay, where's that fear coming from? Where's that resistance coming from? Let me really investigate that, because therein lies all of our weaknesses. Therein lies all of our limitations. Is the resistance, that friction, that conflict you feel is showing you, hey, there's something to look at that you need to forgive. Okay, and change. So then, before I just give an example, what I would like to suggest is, if you hear what I'm saying and you find this to be supportive and you really want to understand this more, you're more than welcome to put comments and ask me questions. And you can read what I post, you can watch some of the videos I post, you can read some of the blogs that I post, my blog, other people's blogs. But if you really want to learn this for yourself, because I noticed the other day I did a video or something, and some people were commenting and saying, or one person was commenting and saying, hey, I'm doing these self-forgiveness statements that you're doing. I've never done it before, which is really cool. But there's still like a lot of nuance and basic vocabulary that you need to develop to really understand all of these points. I'm making a video to, in essence, sort of stimulate interest in the point. and give you some examples and show you like, hey, look how I'm speaking about this. Maybe there's something to investigate here. But at the same time, it's like I can do a video where I'm showing you how to solve a calculus problem, but that's not the same as you learning calculus, you know? And if you just watch videos of me talking about it, it's not really the same as you taking the book and studying it for yourself and really trying to practice problems and, you know, and really learning it for yourself. Okay, so I'm just giving you examples based on my personal process and experience. So if you want to take this on for yourself, then I would suggest that you go and I'm trying to think what the website is. I think it's light.destinyiprocess.com. If somebody's watching and knows what I'm talking about, you can place a link, and I can also edit the video description later for the link. Light, L-I-T-E .destiny, D-E-S-T-E-N-I process.com. light.destinyiprocess.com. And destiny is spelled D-E-S-T-E-N-I. Or you can just go to destinyiprocess.com, and then there's several different options for courses you can look at. I would suggest to start with the Light course. It's free, it doesn't cost anything, and it's going to give you the basic vocabulary to understand some of the things I'm sharing so that you can then take this upon yourself. And there's lots of other people talking about these things I'm talking about, so you don't have to just get all your information from me, is my whole point. In fact, I would suggest that you get your information from the source and you take it on for yourself, but you can still watch my videos, watch other people's videos and see examples, right? And that's very supportive, because that was very supportive for me when I started this process in 2008 was when I when I first started investigating this. I mean, I wasn't like fully doing everything correctly and really putting myself into it properly, but I was starting to investigate it and start to understand what it was all about and kind of test things out and stuff. So now they have systems in place which can just take you through the whole process. It's much more convenient and simple to understand than when I started with this, which is really cool that that work was put into there and into this, that people dedicate their lives to doing that. Okay, because this is the only way that our world is going to change. This is the only way that human nature is going to change, is by each individual person taking responsibility for what they've accepted and allowed themselves to be and become and do. And you know, if each person did that, then we could have a system where it's best. You see, the problem is you fearing that we can't have a system of equality because that would require control and dictatorship, because everyone's so fucked up and human nature is so fucked that we just have to control everybody. So what I'm suggesting is, let's not worry about that for a moment. Let's support ourselves to change. Let's be an example, and then let's just share and speak up and support other people to change. And as we see more and more people doing that, and we can accumulate that point, then we can start approaching things on a systemic level to relieve the survival pressures, so that other people who are now in a position where there's no fucking way they'd ever be able to have the time and space to actually consider changing themselves, they're just trying to survive, we can give them the time and space and the education and the tools to be able to start taking self-responsibility. This is what self-responsibility actually is. It's taking responsibility for everything as yourself, not just your individual self. Defining yourself as an individual just all by itself, like just this body and that's me and that's everything I am, it's not real, because there's no separation physically between me and this computer, between me and you. I mean, how do you know that? Because what am I breathing right now? I'm breathing air. Those molecules are coming into my body and becoming a part of my body, right? So there is no actual physical separation between anything. It's just in our minds, we define ourselves with a little bubble in our mind, and then we think that we're separate, and therefore we now start fearing each other and so forth. Right? So this is the process to take self-responsibility. That way you can begin changing yourself. If we have enough people doing that, we can have an impact in the larger systems, so we can remove survival pressure so other people can do this. And when we get to that point where there's enough people who are changing, it will be a lot easier for us to see that, oh, okay, we don't have to make a dictatorship to impose equality. We can support everyone just to become their best and create more systems and more systems that just keep supporting that, right? So it's not about dictatorship, right? That's the past. That's currently what we have right now. You say, well, we don't have communist dictatorships in the US, let's say. Yeah, we have corporate dictatorships. We have corporations dictating to everyone what they should buy and not buy, and how they should feel or not feel based on the images that are being imprinted and programmed into them from a young age. That's dictatorship. They're dictating to you how you need to feel and what the context you see life is about. And everyone thinks life is about pursuing happiness, but they believe it in the context of pursuing their own individual happiness, which is not possible because we are not just individuals, we are also a collective. So we have to understand the balance. And that's why I named my blog The Individual and the Collective. So if you read that blog, you'll understand more my perspective of where I'm coming from on a lot of those points. Okay, so let me give you an example. How do you overcome resistance? Well, here's what you do. Let's talk about overcoming resistance to fearing your neighbor. You sit down and you write it out. And then you just share it. So here's a blog that I wrote today. It's called, Did Jesus Say to Fear Our Neighbor? And I'm just going to read it out loud. So you can see an example of, I've written this blog as a point of self-support for myself to stop fearing at every level possible, fearing my neighbor, fearing judgment, fearing the reactions of other people, fearing, I accidentally opened Skype, hold on. Okay. Fearing just speaking up, right? And you may say, but Cameron, you talk all the time on Facebook. You don't have any fears. Bullshit. We all have fears, okay? So I'm giving you an example of I'm doing it, then you can do it, okay? And just even me saying these words, if you go and read my blog and read it out loud, maybe it'll support you. I don't know. It depends if that's a pattern that's within you or not, okay? And you may say like, hey, this is pretty cool, but I see more clearly into my own patterns and I want to do it for myself in a different way. And that's fine, okay? Okay, so let me read it out loud. Not too long, so just take a minute. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to believe that I have nothing to say. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to speak freely in my mind, but be afraid of speaking openly with others. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to fear speaking up about what is best or the problems that I see in this world because as a child I was punished for questioning the status quo. I was belittled, I was hit, I was told to shut up. I forgive myself as my parents for attempting to suppress the expression of a child questioning what the adults are doing, as I realized that they were just trying to survive and support me to survive. And they did not have the awareness as a parent that I have now. And yet they brought me into this world and now I am here. And thus it is my responsibility to speak up and to stop all abuse on this planet. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to believe that it is not my place to tell another what they are doing that is not best. And yet I would have no problem telling my child or someone who works for me to change their behavior. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to fear being rejected by others for speaking the truth, when the acceptance that I currently feel is not real. It is only based on conforming to the standards of a system that is not best, and thus I would rather speak the truth and support others to see through the illusion of this system within and without than be accepted by those who only want the system to continue as is. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to not realize that as soon as I begin speaking up, I will receive criticism, rejection, slander, vitriol, argument, disagreement, backlash, and even threats, because I am now challenging the pursuit of happiness, which is the greatest lie, and very few at the moment want to be honest about it. Yet, if I say nothing, knowing what I know, then those who may have been willing to reconsider life on earth may never get the opportunity, because if I'm not willing to speak common sense and give the solutions, then who will? I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to believe that there is no consequence for not doing what is best when I see what to do. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to justify others not standing up and speaking up because I had justified it within myself. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to not see or realize my potential, my real potential, to support others to let go of their bullshit and begin walking the journey to life. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed others' opinions of me to dictate what I do or don't do. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to believe that I must prove to others in their minds and convince them of what I am doing and my starting point as to support the creation of what is best, when my actions show and will show my intentions. And although others may misinterpret them, that is based on their starting point. Thus, although I may use others' feedback in order to check reactions and weaknesses within myself, the only person that I can answer to at the end of the day is myself within my own self-honesty. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to not realize that simply by speaking and writing and sharing, that I can influence others to stop accepting less than who they are, as this is the way I was influenced and continue to influence myself. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to not realize that if I allow myself to chase and participate in feelings and emotions, then I open myself up to be susceptible to manipulation. But in the end, I would only have myself to blame because that is what I had accepted and allowed myself to be and place value on. I forgive myself that I have accepted and allowed myself to not realize that if I fear my neighbor in any way, then I am not living the Jesus pattern or message of love my neighbor as myself and give as I want to receive. Because this is not possible when there is fear of another or even fear of myself. And thus, within that, I realize that a lot of fear is due to the survival system that we are all participating in. And thus, I am able to push through my fear of others by speaking up, sharing, challenging others and myself when I see something that is not best, but also placing myself in a position to change the system so that it is not requiring us to only focus on survival. Because even if I walk my own process of not fearing others, I have to be self-honest that others will still find it difficult to not fear if they are constantly under the pressures of survival. And furthermore, if the solution to fear is self-forgiveness, which it is, then if someone is focused on survival all the time, they will not have the time or space to focus on self-forgiveness. And thus I realized that the best purpose to give myself for this life is to stand up and change the system so that all our basic needs are guaranteed. And that this will create the space and time for the majority of humanity to walk their process. And thus I realized that this life that I have been given is a gift for me to give life to others, and that it is only possible by stopping the systems of abuse and creating systems that support life equally for all. And thus, I do not expect anyone else to walk this before me. I walk this until it is done. And through that, I realize others will be empowered to walk as well. I commit myself to release myself from all the fears within me towards speaking up and sharing my process and speaking up about what is best, regardless of what others say. Using the feedback to support me to remove all weakness as that which is not supportive of me expressing myself fully as life as what is best. Removing all ego as that which I have allowed to control me and manipulate myself with through the pursuit of energy and feelings. I commit myself to stand in the face of everyone, including myself, to challenge all points where I am accepting less than what is best, both within myself and within others, to not fear the reactions within myself or others, to walk through the energy, to breathe through it, to look at where I react to either myself or others, to walk through these points and remove them through writing, self-forgiveness, and corrective action. All right. So that is an example of self-forgiveness. And if you have watched from the beginning, what you might notice is that pretty much everything I was talking about up to reading the self-forgiveness was contained within the self-forgiveness. And I wrote that right before doing this video. So doing the self-forgiveness is what allowed me also to gain clarity on a lot of these points. And then that's why I was able to share it so openly, because I did that first. So if you're having a resistance to sharing yourself and sharing things that you understand and that you want to talk about, what I would suggest is to first just do self-forgiveness. Just forgive yourself for everything, how you're feeling about it, and basically convince yourself, if you want to use that term, clarify for yourself why that resistance is not valid and why it's not best for you, and why what you're seeing as sharing would be best. Okay, so perhaps you can see how this basic pattern that I've shown you could be used to overcome resistance to anything. Because all you have to do is look at what is it I'm afraid of about that particular thing. Now, if it's you're afraid of jumping off a cliff with no parachute and dying because it's a 100-foot cliff, well, do the self-forgiveness. And if you're being honest with yourself, you'll realize that we live in a physical world where you will actually be hurt and injured and potentially killed. So yes, remove the fear of it, but that doesn't mean you do it. You see what I'm saying? Just because you fear something doesn't mean you have to necessarily go do it, because the fear may be an actual practical point. Doesn't mean the fear experience is valid. But the fear experience doesn't in itself tell you whether you should do something or not do something. And that's the problem, is we're all not doing things because we are afraid. So let's remove the fear first, and then let's look at the common sense within, is this something that would be best to do or not best? Not based on, should I do it because I'm afraid of it or not? Just because you're not afraid of something doesn't mean you should do it. You may not be afraid of confronting people, but that doesn't mean you should do it in that particular case, because maybe you're just doing it from the perspective of trying to control them or whatever it is. You may not be experiencing the fear, is what I'm saying. So what I've found for myself and for those that have asked me for advice is that whatever the problem is they're facing, like, I can't tell you the answer. Like, do you really want me to dictate my opinion about what you should do? What I'm always going to say is, look, I'm going to first suggest that you do self-forgiveness, and I'll do self-forgiveness on the point to anything I'm reacting to. And then let's talk about it. I mean, you may already see for yourself the answer. But in reality, we should be able to agree on something. We should be able to agree on what's best. And if you feel like, well, how can I know what's best for another person? Okay, forgive yourself first and bring yourself to a point where you can see it clearly, because you can see what's best for another person. That doesn't mean you control them or you force them to do it. But it is possible to see what's best for another person. Because if it wasn't possible, then how would you support your children? How would you raise children? How would you be in a marriage? How would you be in any sort of like social situation if you can't see what's best for another person, right? The reason why people say they can't see what's best for another person is because really they don't even want to do what's best for themselves. They just want to pursue happiness and pursue energy and all those things. It's just really bullshit that they're covering up with something that sounds like they're not trying to control people. But you follow those people and you'll see they are trying to control other people in their environment anyways, and they're constantly judging people, and they're making posts about politics and like fuck Obama or fuck Trump or whatever. Like they actually are saying they know what's best for certain things, but when it comes to I actually have to fucking change and do something differently, oh, I don't know what's best. Like, bullshit. You're giving an opinion about it all the time. So if you're currently in that point where you're like, well, I don't see how it's possible to know what's best for another person, this is another form of resistance. Do the forgiveness first. If you have resistance to doing self-forgiveness, you know what's interesting? You could just forgive yourself for that. Just start there. Test it out. See if it works for you. Like, don't believe me. Don't watch this video and be like, wow, that was really cool. Awesome video, Cameron. Good job. Like, go actually do this for yourself. Take something that you're actually resisting and test this out and see if it really works. Because it will. If you're sincere with yourself and your intention is, I actually want to get to the bottom of how do I want this to change. And just be honest with yourself. Be honest with all the ways you're actually feeling about it. Who knows? You might be able to save your marriage. You might be able to change the nature of the relationship you have with your children, with your friends, with your family. And if we did that, we could change the nature of all the relationships in this world so that they become best. Because no one goes into something really wanting it not to be best for themselves. It's just we're confused about what's actually best because we're still accepting so much fear and stuff to cloud our judgment and our understanding of actual just basic common sense. So if you enjoyed this video, if you found it supportive, please share it, right? That's a basic thing you can do. Just share this video. Just make a post where you say, hey, this is something I found supportive. Check it out. I would appreciate that, right? Because only people who see it, only the people who are, following my Facebook feed are going to see this if it's just me sharing it. So if you found it supportive, share it. When I find things that you do that are supportive, I will share them as well. I always do. Okay, cool. Oh, one more thing. I'm going to post it right now since I'm now done talking. light.destinyiprocess.com. I just made a comment. That is the website. Why didn't it come up as a link? Hold on. Oh, there we go. Okay, I put the HTTP in front and now it's showing you the actual link. Okay, so check that out because that's going to give you the actual basics. It's free. Just sign up for it and start going through it, right? If you're having any issues with it, like you're like, I just can't understand this stuff, that means you have a vocabulary issue. It means you have a processing issue. And I can help you with that, right, with TechnoTutor, right? That has been this Technotutor has become the major support for me to actually start walking my process more effectively. Because before it was like I was just kind of going around like not really processing what was being suggested for me to do. But when I started really doing this consistently, then suddenly like everything started to shift and become a lot of the resistance started to go away because I was actually able to see what it was I was doing. My processing ability went up. So then I could actually start forgiving myself for real. Okay, instead of just always forgiving myself out of a point of reaction to just kind of make myself feel better. If you're just trying to make yourself feel better, you have to forgive all of it so you don't feel anything, right? And not just like you feel numb, like you really don't have any reaction to it. You could just see clearly, right? So that's the point you want to get to. And I'm just looking at some of these comments. That's really cool, Richard. I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, and we're going to do more videos talking about relationships and stuff as well. There's a lot more we can go into in terms of our own process of what we've walked through and everything, because we do have a very stable agreement together as husband and wife and as parents raising our children and stuff. It's very stable, so, and very supportive. All right, then. I will talk to you all later. I have a meeting coming up pretty soon I need to get ready for. All right, everybody, have a good one. And please share this video if you found it supportive. All right, talk later. Bye.